think we're live. So welcome everybody to Open Rooms 9, where we'll be talking about access to art and looking at the relationship between culture and inequality. So thanks very much for joining us for the discussion. And we're really delighted and lucky to welcome Larry Achiampong and Mike Pinnington to reflect on these issues through the context of Larry's practice. And just to give you a bit of background on our two speakers, Larry Achiampong is a multidisciplinary artist whose solo and collaborative projects employ imagery, oral and visual archives, live performance and sound to explore ideas surrounding class, cross-cultural and post-digital identity. And Mike Pinnington is a writer, editor and consultant based in Liverpool. He's a co-founder and editor-in-chief of visual arts and cultural commentary publication, The Double Negative. So we're really looking forward to tonight's discussion and kind of thinking about the importance of questioning how arts institutions reinforce existing patterns of inequality and potentially how they can challenge and kind of reinvent notions around access. I think one of the key things for me when I was thinking about kind of access to culture was thinking about who is it produced by and who is it produced for, and kind of who's controlling that narrative. So just to kind of go over the format of the event tonight, I'm going to hand over shortly to Mike and Larry to lead the discussion around this for around 40 minutes, but we will have about 20 minutes at the end of the discussion for any questions. So if you'd like to submit any questions, you can do that on the chat function on the Twitch stream, or if you're on Discord, you can submit them through our Discord chat as well. So yeah, I'm just going to hand over to Mike and Larry from this point on. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing the discussion. So
thanks, Sarah. And thanks for to OpenEye for inviting us to do this tonight, and also for facilitating and hosting this conversation. I just wanted to kind of give a bit of context to this idea of access to the arts and why I thought this would be an interesting conversation to have, really, and especially why I wanted to have the conversation with Larry. So I think, just to kind of expand on what Sarah has said about the idea of who produces culture and who is it for and why. So I first met Larry about probably a couple of years ago now, just prior to him having a bit of a kind of a display in Tate Liverpool's Tate Exchange space, and I had the pleasure to interview Larry for the Double Negative. And as soon as we got talking, it kind of became really obvious we had certain things in common in terms of our perspective on the sector, and kind of maybe a little bit in common as well, and how we'd found our journeys to finding our way into the sector as well. So from my perspective, I'm not an artist, I'm a writer, but I think my background as someone who's got a working class background has really played into kind of the very circuitous route that I've gone on to get into the sector, really. So when I'm thinking about that, and when I think about it in any great detail, it's about the networks and opportunities and the kind of perception of class, of yourself, but also of those around you and your peers as well. Self-image and the time you have to play with, and the confidence that you've got, and the money or lack of money that you have as well. These things were all kind of factors when it came to me embarking on and finding a career in the arts sector, really. And that was something that me and Larry kind of spent quite a long time talking about in our interview, and it became less an interview than a conversation. And I thought tonight would be a good place to kind of expand and take that conversation on a little bit, really, through the lens of Larry's practice. I mean, I don't know about you, Larry. I mean, I know that we have spoken about this, but it'd be good to hear a little bit from you about your route into the sector and your experience finding your way as a contemporary artist.
No, thanks for the question. It's also really nice to be talking with you again, Mike, as well, and thanks to Sarah and the rest of the OpenEye team for this opportunity. Yeah, I guess the weird thing with that question is like I feel like I'm still living in it, if you know what I mean. I don't feel like I've kind of like, you know, sometimes people approach me like, oh, you know, like, it's great you've made it. And I'm like, made what? You know, I feel like it's a constant journey. And yeah, certainly, you know, with reference to the conversation that we had a couple of years ago around, you know, class, race, and backgrounds that tend to be othered within a scene that, you know, what should we say, rewards those of like higher class or who have, you know, who are white or male or have money. That's felt like a constant battle for me, like from day to day. So when I say that, for example, I turn off, you know, from this talk and check into some emails. There's the constant kind of conversation with institutions about budget and money in relation to building work, you know, which of course I think, you know, is something that, you know, all artists have to deal with, but some artists are going to find that way more difficult than others, especially because if we're honest about it, a lot of institutions don't pay the artists well. You know, they don't pay the artists well, and so, you know, you're dealing with having to negotiate or having to fight, you know, not even simply just one's own corner, but the corner of many other artists, as it were. Really, I know that even within my position, that I'm representing potentially, you know, a lot of up and coming young Black artists, you know, by how I am, or if I do a job well or not. So there's a lot of pressure, I think, and you know, I try to do what it is that I can. You know, research is very important, but at the same time, it's kind of carving out and making those important debates for why I shouldn't have to talk about, you know, getting paid in the first place, or being, you know, treated fairly. You know, things like having to demand contracts, having to do that again and again, or, you know, yeah, it's quite a loaded question, I know, and I'm kind of hearing it from a certain angle, but it's, you know, there's that, and then there's the experience of studying within an institution, you know, coming from a background that really just isn't catered for in that way. You know, not just from my own experience of, you know, when I think about studying in the early 2000s, being this like Nintendo kid, and, you know, what the hell are video games? Why would you even, you know, why do you still play video games? 20 years later, video games is center to, you know, the art scene and everything. And, you know, simply just the thing of existence, the existence or the lack thereof, visibility wise of Black practitioners of color, or simply people from working class backgrounds, or the underclass. Like, when you don't see that, you don't see that in front of you, and you come from that you know, particular lived experience, you can feel like you're going crazy, you know, because you have to internalize all of that. Or if you even try to make a conversation around that, you know, people look at you like you're weird, or, you know, like you're wearing some kind of outfit that is blinding people. So and then that becomes magnified even through my experience of teaching people, you know. So you know, I tutor at the Royal College of Art. I've been teaching there for the last 4 years. This year will be the fifth year. And, you know, students of color, particularly, you know, Black students, they have a hard time. They have a hard time because their needs are not catered for, you know. So it's still quite a contentious thing. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or attempts to open it up.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, in having a platform to have this conversation, I think it's, you know, I tweeted earlier that, like, you know, I noticed a while ago, like, we ran a strand of articles about working in people working in the sector from working class background. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that on the one hand, it was getting like loads of hits and people really enjoying those articles, and thought, oh, thank God someone's having this conversation. But on the other hand, I saw people saying, well, you know, what's the point of having this conversation? You know, nothing's going to change. But I think it's important to kind of platform issues like this, because, you know, if you don't start the conversation, then you're always going to be, if you're the you know, the person from the working class background or underclass background, and you find yourself in the sector at a big institution, for example, like you say, Larry, you might be kind of internalizing things, and then you're in the position of feeling like a bit of a pretender and acting. You know, I mean, people. There's also the one that's like, well, like you say, you know, what's it like now? You've made it now, and my version of that is, well, surely you're middle class now. You know, you've been to uni and you've worked in the sector, and like, well, okay, but like, you know, I've still got the kind of the working class context that I come from, and although it's kind of a relatively soft one, I've got a Merseyside accent, which is kind of unusual in you know, especially when you go to London and have meetings and stuff. That's kind of like, you can be strangely, as laughable as this is, you can be strangely exoticized by the sector for kind of having any point of difference, I think. So I think it's really important, you know, and, you know, I think you did it was good to hear your perspective there of, like, you know, being at a kind of a place like the RCA, which is so established and so part of that kind of, you know, you're at the RCA, amazing, but you're still talking about students who are kind of really struggling with that situation, because they're not maybe the typical what people think of as an RCA student.
Definitely, and you know, and they potentially get, you know, ostracized as a result. You know, it's you know, I've had students where they're literally sitting in front of me, and from what they tell me, like, they're close to leaving because of the lack of kind of care that system has towards them. Is, to me, that's unacceptable. And, you know, it's interesting the point that you made about, you know, when some people say, you know, what's the point of fighting for or protesting about this stuff? And it's true. I mean, you say nothing and everything will just continue as it is. I grew up like the middle kid in my family, and like, so I was always like saying stuff or talking when I was told to shut up or be quiet, and I kind of almost can't help myself. If I see something, it's important to talk about that. It's important to make that point known. And, you know, of course, especially when we're working on these projects or we're working within an environment, I don't care if you're Tate. I don't give a damn if you're MoMA. Like, if you're not respecting what I'm doing, what other practitioners are doing, and you're not giving me, you know, that equity, and I know what you're getting as the institution, then, you know, this conversation needs to end. And I've felt more and more strongly about that as time has gone along. It's not been to do with opportunities being received. It's actually to do with frustration. Like, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm getting older and turning into an old guy, but, like, you know, it's the frustration of these institutions that love to talk about fairness. They love to talk about equality. They love using these buzzwords, right? But they're not preaching anything near what they're apparently practicing, you know. So, yeah.
I think maybe, you know, the last few months, you know, has been talked about as a tipping point, especially in conversations around diversity, when it comes to representation in galleries, but also, you know, trying to make sure that you're doing right by your audience, and by that I mean all of your potential audience. You know, I think maybe the days have gone now where places can kind of have that one show a year from, like, I don't know, Larry Achiampong or Lubena Himid or John Okonfra. You know, I think we're starting to see now this has to be an actual thing where you program because it's good artwork, not because it's kind of like you've ticked the box for that 12 months of program type thing. I mean, you may well not feel as optimistic about it as me, but I feel like we've now got to a point that they really have to kind of talk the talk and walk the walk. They can't just do kind of like, you know, the tokenistic one thing and then, okay, let's get back to normal programming now, or whatever it is that is the conversation. I mean, I really want to get to a point where, you know, we can talk about how people being programmed, because it's really interesting art, and as an audience, I think, you know, I want to talk about this more a bit later on as well, but as an audience, I think we can be given a bit more credit, that we don't just always want to see kind of like the Andy Warhol show. Because you can only you can only spend like 18 quid so many times on Andy Warhol exhibition or whatever.
If you have it.
Say again?
If you have 18 quid, you know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, there's more than a cinema ticket, really.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I pulled 18 quid out of the air there, but, you know, it's there or thereabouts now that we're talking for
it's true.
You know, a big show. And I think, you know, as audiences, you know, people watch different films when they're in different moods. They read different books for different reasons. And so surely we don't just always want this kind of like, you know, kind of white modernist artist perspective, as much as that's a great era in visual art. You know, there's more to the picture, and there's more following on from that conversation, and there's more we can learn and more that we can see. And I think, you know, if you offer that to an audience, again, you know, I probably sound more glass half full than people who know me expect me to be. But like, I think if you offer the audience a kind of a range, then they'll start to kind of broaden their own perspectives and go and see more of these artists as well, I think. I mean, I don't know if you think that too, or...
No, definitely. I mean, you know, also the thing to add, like, I am optimistic. I am. Like, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing otherwise. Like, I mean, yeah, of course, there are people whom I don't need to say any names, but yeah, there are people who I'm aware of whom, you know, you wonder why you're still doing what you're doing if you think this whole thing is, you know, shot to shit. But it's just about being critical. And, you know, I have to do that with myself. I have to be critical of myself in relation to how I am as a parent, how I'm, you know, you have to try to think about progressive ways where you're not hurting other people, because we, you know, people know how it feels to be hurt, like some people more or less than others, but you don't want that to kind of carry on as a culture. So no, there's an optimism, definitely. I think even in this kind of point of time of, you know, pandemic and coronavirus, one of the beautiful things to have seen is that there are aspects of unity coming about through struggle. Not entirely, of course. You know, there's, you know, the government, for example, has this sloganish kind of idea of we're in this together, and it's like, well, no, we're not in this together. You know, there are those who have the logistics to be able to look after themselves, and then there are those that don't. What you do have are, in some places, people that are amassing as communities, whether locally or across digitally, online, that kind of thing, you know, sharing, talking, connecting. You know, the government hasn't kind of like set that up. What they've done is they've asked people to clap every Thursday evening while they take away the, you know, the salaries of nurses and doctors. So no, like for me, you know, the optimism is with people, because, you know, when we become critical, these so-called powers that be, whether they're institutions or whatnot, they've got no choice but to listen. Because if we're not turning up to their doors, or, you know, going to their events, or even clicking on, you know, the images that they post, they become irrelevant. I mean, you know, there are already issues with these organizations, Tate and whatnot, like trying to keep up with the curve with you know, like digital technologies. Everything from a lot of these institutions just seems so bland, because they have a lack of being able to connect culturally. But certainly I agree with what you say about, you know, opening up that space to see things that have not been allowed to be seen. You know, I think historically about shows like The Other Story, which Rashida Rein, you know, fought tooth and nail to have happen at the Hayward Gallery, you know, decades ago. You know, there is still that a similar level of fighting to exist to show things, and I'm tired of hearing the kinds of excuses of, oh well, you know, it's not really what the public want. Well, you know, the public are being given what apparently these cultural leaders believe that people want, and there isn't consultation, there isn't open conversation about that, or enough open conversation. You know, if you open that into the realm of popular culture, I think you and I were talking about the likes of you know, the Black Panther film, for example. I don't even think Marvel thought that film was going to be that big, and I'm saying that as a fan of that character. You know, if I turn the camera, you'll see a load of my, you know, Black Panther collected compendiums and issues and so on. Like I watched the ground on that for years. And one of the interesting things with that is you always know when a company is like putting big behind something, or, you know, kind of anticipating something to have a positive impact by the types of toys that they're selling. And I remember like searching for toys for my kids, and, you know, in comparison to, say, I don't know, Iron Man or Captain America or whatever, there are hardly any toys at all that I could find at Tesco or whatnot. So, you know, it comes down to this lack of kind of faith or belief in practitioners of color, practitioners, you know, Black practitioners from backgrounds that are different from the status quo, because there's a lack of genuine understanding. And in a way, I guess part of that actually comes down to the fact that those people of power, they just don't have, they lack that lived experience. There needs to be more people who have some of those experiences, who have who are given the equity or that space or that chance to be able to make those decisions. I just don't think that, you know, all of, you know, we look across the UK, for example, that all of those same directors are gonna, you know, wake up the next day and be like, oh yeah, you know, gonna be progressive now. You know, what you have are, you know, some of these silly letters which people have kind of like put out, organizations have put out, and they don't even know what they're really saying. Probably just copied and pasted from something else. So again, like I said, it's buzzwords. So again, it, like I said, like, it comes down to being critical. It's not, you know, like, I'm certainly optimistic. I don't know, I wouldn't be a parent otherwise. Do you know what I mean? It's, and all of that is intertwined. You know, as they say, the personal is political.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, when you think about the status quo and you know, people in decision-making positions saying, well, you know, a movie that with a Black lead isn't going to do well at box office. I think that's because they you know, the people who are there green lighting movies are the status quo, and they don't see, you know, the other layers in society who are kind of crying out for something that isn't a kind of, you know, a white straight couple rom-com type thing or whatever. You know, and I think this is something that I find really, not just about your work, but about kind of a lot of visual contemporary art that I like people like Keith Piper and John Comfort and yourself. It's like you kind of occupy a lot of ground that kind of seeps through, you know, different forms of popular culture as well. So be that music or comic books, or, you know, something I find really interesting in your work, Larry, is, you know, the science fiction element. And so you've kind of got all those elements with which to engage an audience. And then once you've got that audience, you can kind of, there's more layers to the work to discuss the bigger pictures that you want to talk about with the work. So for example, like I first came across you when you were interviewed with David Blandy in Art Papers for Finding Fanon. I'd never heard of Frantz Fanon. We got that Art Papers because it was like a Philip K. Dick science fiction special issue. And that's how I came to your work, and that's how I came to know about what Fanon was talking about, and you know, And then, you know, I understood your work through that lens of that interview. And then quite a while later, I actually got to see the films that you and David made. And, you know, of course, you use the terrain of a video game in that as well. So is that something that I mean, obviously these are all areas of interest for you, but is that a kind of way for you to sneak through the message as well by using these kind of pop culture mediums?
It's not so much, you know, a way of sneaking in a message as it is perhaps, you know, that it's been a part of my life growing up and still is, you know. I grew up, was born in the pretty much mid 80s, like, so, you know, child of the late 80s, 90s, you know, playing like 8-bit video games and stuff. My my mum couldn't afford to get us like video games, and so me and my brother, we would hustle in like the in the playgrounds and stuff. And you know, like when you're sat in front of things like that, or you know, you're watching old school VHS tapes of, I don't know, Enter the Dragon through to Back to the Future, you know, that was my life growing up. You know, I was saying the other day, I think it was probably another talk, like, you know, I didn't get to go to a gallery until I was an adult. So I was about 18 or so, you know, so that just wasn't a part of my life in the way that it is, you know, my peers. Does that mean that I wasn't exposed to art? No, it just means I just had an entirely different experience, one that privilege-wise didn't afford me to experience certain aspects of art. But no, for me, video games, and the weird thing about this is I've argued it with some people for years, like that those arguments, funnily enough, have disappeared now that, you know, you see ArtReview, Art Monthly talking about the virtual space. But, you know, for me, video games have always been an art form, because it's that ability to create an atmosphere to kind of like believe in or to imagine. And that's not too dissimilar from entering an art show or an artistic experience of expression. It's, you know, it's the same difference. It's just like apples and oranges, really, as it were. So, you know, by growing up with these aspects of culture and being a fan for those bits of culture, you know, I still buy, play, collect, talk about, and argue with some of my friends about video games and music and films. It's because of those things that I'm surrounded by that they become a part of the work somehow. Sometimes, yeah, I kind of perhaps do that a bit more blatantly. Other times, maybe a little bit more subversive. But it's the thing that I'm into. You know, in the same way that, you know, I grew up skating and skateboarding a bit, so I use that within the work. It's something that I'm perhaps you know, familiar with. That's not to say that within my work, when it comes to building research, that I'm not exploring things that I perhaps don't know about. I'm, you know, constantly you know, referring to material that I don't know as much about, that I want to know more about. But yeah, it comes down to that lived experience and bringing that into the conversations that I'm having, sometimes with a certain kind of, you know, nuance, and then other times one that is perhaps a bit more closer to me personally.
I think, you know, one of the strengths of your work is that it occupies both of those things. It feels very personal to you, but is very nuanced as well. So like something that probably the work that has kind of really developed and progressed and you've kind of revisited a few times is Relic Traveler, which you've talked about as a post-colonial perspective informed by technology, agency, and the body and narratives of migration. And you've just updated that with Reliquary 2, which kind of, you know, addresses the current moment of the coronavirus and how it disproportionately affects, you know, people of color. And you've directly addressed your children in that work as well. I just want, if you could kind of like share some of Relic Traveler and talk us through some of the ideas and how it came about. And
yeah, sure. I mean, so yeah, this this year or summer just gone marks the third year since the establishing of the project, but it really came about, and of course connects to what you asked about popular culture. And initially, I wanted to make a set of stories that maybe that covered or included the use of film or prose writing, and points of popular culture in a way that I guess I didn't feel that I'd seen before. So, you know, this is before obviously Black Panther came out, and in a way, obviously, like during the earlier kind of points of mine and David Blandy's collaborative practice of finding fun on, you know, there are things you learn along the way with different experiences you have with people. And one of the things I learned with what I was doing with David was just different approaches to filmmaking. And, you know, especially being a parent to two young Black kids, like, I just would sit sometimes and think, like, what is it that they're going to grow up and be surrounded by? Like, is it going to be the same kind of thing that I was surrounded by? Like, will they be able to see, like, you know, Black heroes that can potentially like fly to space and feel like they can feel that type of energy or that potential or that strength and so on? So I guess on the back of like the conversations and debates and even arguments sometimes that me and David had about at the time about Brexit, actually, I was just reading a lot about, I was trying to also surround myself and read about what was happening in the African continent. At that point in time, there is still a passport program being developed that will allow Africans to travel amongst the 54 or 55, depending on the way you see it, like states with no problem. So one part of the world, borders are opening, another part of the world, you know, borders are closing. So it felt like a really interesting kind of starting point for me to build, to world build a set of ideas, to be speculative, to think about, you know, my interest in science fiction and ask certain questions of like, what if, or, you know, what happens with all this like nationalism that's on the rise in the West, if it continues to have the space to live, to grow. And I'm really thinking, like, to the point down the line that, you know, if these so-called ideas by these people who push them are successful, well, really, you know, you close yourself off to culture, and culture on an economic level, so many levels, or you become a relic. You become a relic in time. Like, that's what happens. So that's where the word relic came from, and then of course traveler, because these relic travelers are people sent from through a program from the African Union to places around the planet to pick up vocal testimonies that have been left by people who've been oppressed, and those testimonies which you hear within the films, and then visually, of course, you're kind of traveling with the relic traveler. You know, those vocal testimonies are picked up because it's part of a way or process of healing and also a way of governing a future that is from a bottom-up perspective, not a top-down one. So it's about listening to those stories that have been pushed to the periphery or nigh erased, that kind of thing. So, you know, there were so many things that I wanted to achieve with the project in the beginning, and I remember like talking about it with, you know, close friends and so on. Because like I don't know, when I'm developing a project, I don't do the kind of crit thing. That doesn't interest me, because I think I've witnessed and been in too many crits where ideas just get shot down, where someone's like, oh, that's not possible, or, you know. So I was thinking big with all of these things and imagining, you know, like film or music and all of this stuff. But then what I was doing when it came to applying for things alongside Nefertiti Boshi-Shandorf, my producer, and then at certain points with the help of the likes of Louise Searle or even Wamila Sebekan, who who helped me to realize the flag designs from sketches I'd done and so on, was you know, I would use these things that I'd applied for to essentially run pitches for like these visions that I had, really, you know. And so out of that, you have the strand of the films, you have the strand of performances, you have, in this case, the London Underground Commission. And again, a lot of this comes from you know, germs or seeds of ideas, packed with a lot of conversation about how this stuff works, or, you know. And one of the things, even with the Relic Traveller film, which is really important, let me go back up to one of the images with the suit, was actually, yeah, thinking about the suit itself. Like, how do I make it look believable, you know, other than, you know, it, without putting some crazy silver kind of glittery thing that just looks like it's just not potentially real. So, you know, a lot of research went into that, into you know, MiG pilot costumes, you know, Russian design, which had then been reverse engineered by the Chinese, and the version which I found in the end, which I then also kind of tinkered about with visually for the film, was of Chinese design. So in a way, that was me talking about the Chinese presence within the African continent without having to necessarily say it in a matter of certain words. So, you know, so a lot of research went into it, and still goes into this as well. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I broke up a little bit there. So I'm a little bit conscious of time. Are we okay, Sarah, to carry on for a little bit longer? And
yeah, I'm cool. I'm all good.
Cool. So, I mean, something that I wanted to bring it around to, if was kind of like, you know, on the, you know, you've, from a distance, you know, I feel like, you know, we've talked a couple of times. We don't know each other well, but I've kind of followed your career over the last few years, especially since the performance at Tate. And I was saying to Sarah before about how, you know, that performance happened on kind of a wet Sunday morning in January or something, or a wet Sunday afternoon. But the space was kind of like, it was, given those conditions, the spread of an audience and how busy it was, you know, the age range and how diverse that audience was that day, it kind of spoke to a possibility of how, you know, galleries can be animated differently by different artists.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you've got the responsibility of institutions and galleries to share some of that weight. You've been incredibly prolific, but, you know, that doesn't come at no cost to yourself. You know, you talked about the research, and you've talked about, you know, obviously the level of work put into production of the works as well. And then you want at some point the kind of responsibility of institutions to kick in and kind of diversify their collections, and also then demonstrate the diversity of the collections by actually putting it on display in galleries, and, you know, as a kind of like, you know, this is what's in our collection, and it demonstrates the diversity of modern and contemporary art, not just the story you think you know. And do you think it's now time for like other people to kind of pick up that baton of responsibility and run with it a little bit?
Totally. It's been that time, is what I would say. It's been that time for a long while. It just so happens that, you know, I guess a disease which has forced, you know, the world to go indoors, like where people, especially white people, white privileged people, can't run away from the facts that are right in front of the face. I mean, how many black people you got to see like being killed before it's like, you know, there is a problem. And it's also not simply something that's just happening in the United States, right? It's a whole load of problems out here. You know, within the text, not the text, the scripts that I've written for the new Relic Traveller film, Reliquary 2, which will be shown in a few weeks' time with John Hanser Gallery. It's in the form of a letter to my children. You know, I did a bit of research and found that, you know, although you know, black people make 3% of the UK's population, we're 4 more times likely to die from the disease. I mean, like, that's racism. that's a manifestation of racism. Like that's not even a debate. And I'm not going to have a debate with anyone else about it. Like, what, you're going to say that, oh, because like there's some black people who are a little bit overweight. That, come on, that's just trash. Like, you know, no, you know what? It's not, and it's also, it's not even so much, it's not even just about the shows. It's about what these organizations are doing with their spaces. You know, what are Tate doing with this new pyramid building that they built in London? Like, and I'm saying this as somebody who I've just recently finished my residency with Somerset House Studios. Name to me another organization in the UK that has done what Somerset House Studios has done in terms of, you know, having that magnitude of artists within a premier kind of world-class showing building. Tate could be or should be shown the way for that. South Bank could be or should be shown the way for that. V&A could be or should be shown the way for that. They open up these little tiny opportunities to kind of like do their tick box things. And I know what it is that they do with their kind of like displaying spaces. In a way, like I ended up agreeing to show in Liverpool. That's how we met in a way. But when I look back at that, it's not something that I'll do again anytime soon. Certainly not, because I see the way in which those of us as practitioners, particularly practitioners of color, we get used for the gold that we've got in terms of what we show, what we're capable of showing. You know, that goes into Arts Council reports, ticking boxes. We got this amount of artists in, and you know, it opened up to this amount of people. Well, what if you gave us like genuine like opportunities, not just to show up on a day and play some sounds, but actually have conversations that actually that go beyond and really permeate. So I think it's about you know, these organizations or people like putting their money or their resources where their mouth is. You know, it's not enough just to share a story or say something on Twitter, or, you know, like, you got resources, share them. If you can, share them, you know. I just find it strange, like, and that's the thing, like, I'm sure that, you know, a typical kind of like snotty arty type might even say, oh, well, you know, Somerset House isn't even all that of a gallery or whatnot. But it's like, they're known worldwide. They have a platform, and that's been used. You can debate it, you can, you know, critique it or whatnot, but have Tate done the same in terms of, you know, the space that they have? No, they haven't. Do they have that space? Yes, they do. Do they have a particular plan about how to use that space? Yes, they do. Does it cater for genuinely in a way that looks after the artists and especially artists whom are oppressed? No, it doesn't. You know, otherwise there wouldn't even be the protests that are happening with regards to, you know, the 300 plus people who've been, you know, just like their livelihoods just taken off one day, literally one day. So there's a lot of work that's been needing to be done, you know, but I think there's a lot of problems and symptoms and so on that you know, that are within this system that we work in. And you know, there are different things that need to be pulled apart or opened up, critiqued and broken down for new things to happen. I just don't think that using the same old models are going to be necessary or going to work going forward. You know, like, if you try to look in the future where, you know, like, beyond the difficulty of the virus at the moment, how are people going to care as much about galleries as they did before the virus? Why are they going to want to give a damn if they don't see themselves in these spaces? No, that's going to change. So these institutions, they've got to, you know, they know the time that their time is up. They got to make a real decision, a genuine one. And you're going to change, or you're going to become a relic. As simple as that.
Yeah. I think, you know, the time for, like, you know, people like yourself being told, you know, be the change you want to see type thing, that okay, that's great, but then that puts all of the onus on you as an individual. And I think, given the last 6 months or so, I think there'll be people in institutions, whether it be, you know, at the South Bank Centre, Tate, V&A, whoever, there'll be people in those institutions leading kind of, you know, you'd hope and you think, you know, conversations that take in reflection and research and how we do this right now. And I think, you know, what I hope we'll start to see over the next 6, 12, 18 months is a proper commitment to change, and a commitment to how they can not be the relic that you're saying they really are under threat of being. You know, I think people have missed being able to go and see art over the last 6 months. But then you think about the kind of art that you want to see and the kind of spread and depth and breadth of artwork that you want to see as well. And I think the way that big institutions can really demonstrate that best is through really properly thinking about how they organize and display their collections, because they've got all of that work and they can tell stories through collections the way a one-off exhibition can't always really do, I think. It's great having, you know, a Lubena Himid show or a Larry Achiampong show or whoever, but that might just be for a 3-month spell or less even. And you might go to that show, some of that stuff will seep in, but then beyond that, you know, it's the day to day, you move on to the next thing. If we're not kind of being told a variety of stories all of the time, then, you know, that isn't going to go in, and people aren't going to have the opportunity to kind of see things from different perspectives and change their own perspectives and perceptions of things, I think. So I think, yeah, you're right. I think, you know, going forward now is we need to see change and demonstrable change from the people who have the resource to do it, I think.
Definitely.
I mean, I've got my fingers crossed. I have genuinely got kind of, I've got a bit of optimism about certain, certain galleries, you know, and certain institutions, I think, that, you know, want and understand that they need to move in the right direction, really.
Yeah, you know, I don't, you know, obviously, you know, we'll see how that happens in time to come. If that happens, what happens as a result of that. But yeah, I think, you know, like I said, and, you know, even with regards to, you know, education institutions as well, they got to change too. Like, can't be the same as it was. It just can't. But no, you have to have optimism with this. I believe that it's important to this. There's just no point otherwise. But no, you know, there are plenty of us that are watching closely. Unfortunately, more and more of us that are opening our mouths, and that's going to be important as well, because then these so-called organizations can't get away with what it is that they're doing. They can't continue to get away, is what I would say. You know, it's not, you know, the interesting thing I've noticed is, you know, there are some who say, oh, you know, it's crazy what's been happening with Tate. And it's like, but that's been happening for years. Or like, you know, these kinds of strange practices where galleries, like, they have so much money for example, like entertainment and, you know, like beverages and stuff, but they don't have budget to pay their artists. That's the dumbest thing. That's just stupid, you know? And I'm not saying this as somebody who has an inkling. I'm saying this as somebody who's worked in a range of galleries. Like years ago, I've worked in there, and you see this stuff, you're like, whoa, this is, you know, so the ecology's just got to change. I'm not saying that, look, you know, we can't have a good time still, or people can't have like a drink or whatnot. You can do it. It's just rethinking how you value people, or how certain people are not valued, and they're not being valued. So yeah, that's got to change.
I think, you know, I know that in our chats back and forth the last few days or so, like I definitely felt like I wanted to kind of talk about where we saw the solutions and where we saw the positivity, but maybe it's better to end with like your provocation of, you know, this is the time to change, and maybe open it up to some questions before the end, if that's okay with you.
All good with me.
Is that all right with you, Soraya?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much for that. That was, yeah, brilliant to kind of listen to, and I think you really just hit the nail on the head at the end, in terms of kind of who and what is being treated as valuable in our society, and questioning that, and like the importance as well of like taking action on that, especially for institutions. We did get some questions from the audience during the talk that I'd quite like to cover. I know we have a bit of time left, but you spoke a bit about kind of the experience of students in the education system and the challenges around that. So Natasha on Discord asked, do you have advice for students trying to advocate for themselves and others for the academic institutions to provide the care they require?
I think first of all, trying to get together. I think the power of students' voices united is really important. Like trying to do that stuff on your own. Again, it's that analogy that I made about like, you know, like you're going insane on your own. Like you just don't have the energy, you don't have the foot power, all of it. That's really important. Some people are gonna say, why the hell did you say that? But like, you know, be careful about the tutors you trust. You know, there are some that you will be able to trust and talk to about these things, and hopefully they will be able to give you that space of time. But not all tutors, in the same way that not all practitioners really want to bother or hear any of that stuff. They just want to carry on with routine as rust. So, you know, it's important to build and connect and get other people who feel that way as well, because not everybody is going to, but that's going to help. Because if you try and do that on your own, you're done. Like, it's just, you know, I know people who like started courses and then like they you know, sadly left them because they're alone, or they felt alone. And you know, even if you don't have people who are studying in the same institution as you, if there are people who you know in other institutions or that kind of thing, you know, organize and have those conversations as well. Don't internalize that stuff. It just destroys you. And that's where I think the power starts. It's from with the people. It's not with the institutions. That's the irony. The institutions listen when they see, you know, things heating up, or then they see, oh, that's what's up. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. We did have another one, if I could just get to the message. So yeah, one kind of around what institutions do with their archive, and kind of like addressing unrepresented narratives and how they use their archive to impact change, I suppose. So this one was for Larry. I was wondering how you feel about an archive being a communal resource, and if it's being hosted or kept by an organisation, is it necessarily their responsibility to look after it, or would local historians or socially active practitioners be better keepers?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, you know, the thing is, you know, archives, the way I personally see archives as well is like, you know, institutions don't even necessarily own them. It's people that own them. But institutions become spaces that hold the archives because, yeah, a lot of people don't have the space to hold these things at home. So, you know, like I consider a lot of the things that I own here in my own places as archival. You know, it's historical because it's dated. It goes back to a certain point in time. Yeah, I don't, as much as I work with them, like I don't trust institutions to be able to tell that story all the time. Like I really quick but funny story, but like Museum of Childhood, which I grew up around the corner from in Bethnal Green. I remember years ago, like I went to an exhibition on video gaming there, and they incorrectly named the Super Nintendo as, I think, like the Game Boy. I was like, how the hell could you get that wrong? Like that's sacrilegious. That's ridiculous. And you lot are supposed to be experts, you know. So I think, you know, the point that I'm making is that, you know, the public has the power and even the knowledge and even the expertise of knowing things that certain experts actually don't, you know. how an archive is looked after. I don't know. Like, I think it's, I don't think there's one particular way of looking after things. But if I think about the traditions that I originate from, my Akan Ashanti heritage, that calling and responding, that the approach of the griot, the storyteller, the traveler, is important, and that happens through telling stories, through sharing stories. The human archive is a thing. So I wouldn't entirely rely on objects if I were you. I hope that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, goes back to kind of what you were saying earlier about you can't you learn from the lived experience, don't you?
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we have time for one more.
Go for it.
On a slightly kind of more optimistic note, I was interested in if you've kind of seen or noticed any arts organisations providing like interesting or challenging formats at this time, kind of creating new forms of open culture.
Oh gosh. I don't know. I don't necessarily think about them as an institution, but I guess in a way, like, it's kind of inevitable that they are turning into that. It's been cool seeing what the White Cube have been doing. Like, I like what they've been opening up with video games as well. It's something I've personally wanted to do for a while and talk about. I'll find a way of doing it my own way, but like, I love the fact that they've that they're talking about video games as an art form, but in a way that, much in a way that they talk about, contemporary art or whatever, without so many silly words from an art encyclopedia, and that has kept my eyes kind of like, and my head and my ears like more focused than, I don't know, reading about said Biennale in this part of the planet or that part of the planet, because that's just the usual thing that you expect. But video game conversations, like, genuinely had video games conversations by people who critique, but they're actually spending that time with that, and it's not just being spoken about with all the post-internet scholar and stuff. It's just a nice breath of fresh air. And I think, and I hope as well, it seems to be building, a community of people who feel like what they do or what they enjoy, like, has value. It's a shame that certain things have to exist for people to feel that way, but that unfortunately is what happens. But I feel like what white people have been doing with that, and just the continued striving for being critical has been important. Not everything everyone's always going to agree with, but it's just important that exists there. Because I think for too long, like, a lot of, I'd say, like, most of like the art kind of like kind of debates and whatnot, there's been this weird thing of like having, like, always being neutral and so on. And like, when it comes to certain aspects of lived experiences, if we're talking about that politically and that makes its way into art, like, tell me how you're going to try and be, neutral about, the potential of, I don't know, voting in a, demagogue for a prime minister or president or whatever. Like, you can't be neutral and stuff like that. I mean, you can go for it, but again, that exposes the privilege that certain people have to be able to be ambivalent or just like apolitical. Like, no, actually, like, the decisions or the non-decisions that we make are still decisions in themselves. So yeah, it's a long roundabout way of saying, like, I've been quite excited by that. But I think outside of that, if I'm honest with you, it's just been the usual aspects of popular culture, just watching, shows or films. It's been great to spend time like catching up on DVDs that like I've collected and just not had the time to do because I've been traveling about really. and just, you know, conversation with people, even though, you know, Zoom can be, we're here, it can be a bit annoying, but yeah, that space and time to talk to people and to listen to them has been good.
Mm. Cool. Well, thank you so much for that. Yeah, it was brilliant to listen to. As you know, I did have questions prepared, but they kind of went out the window because the conversation was just so interesting. So yeah,
maybe we can do a part 2.
Yeah, maybe we can. More Zoom. Sign yourself up for more Zoom. No, that would be brilliant. I just wanted to say thank you to both of you for being so generous and open with your time and ideas. We really appreciate it. And just a note that I kind of forgot to mention at the start, that this event is in partnership with Ocula. So we're going to do a transcription of the kind of ideas explored, and you'll be able to access that on Ocula's website under their conversation series. So yeah, just so you know that. So we're going to say goodbye to Mike and Larry at this point. But just to let you know that myself and the OpenEye Gallery team will be on Discord for a little chat afterwards if you want to kind of continue any of the conversations or share any kind of ideas or resources around some of the things we've been discussing. That would be great. But yeah, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you, Laura and Mike. It's been a pleasure.